Hi, everybody. Happy 2026. Welcome to our webinar, Virtues and Vocations, Conversations on Character and the Common Good. In this series, we share conversations about how education and work can promote human flourishing. This is our first webinar of the new year. This series is part of Virtues and Vocations, a national forum housed at the Institute for Social Concerns at the University of Notre Dame and supported by the Kern Family Foundations. Virtues and Vocations seeks to foster a community of practice among scholars and practitioners across disciplines who are keen to understand how best to cultivate character and moral purpose in higher education and the professions. This webinar is just one way that we facilitate these conversations. I am Suzanne Shanahan, and I direct the Institute for Social Concerns, and am host of this series. Today, we are thrilled to bits to welcome renowned scholar and award-winning author, Professor Miroslav Volf. Apologies, a New Year cold. I could not think of a more auspicious way to kick off the new year. Volf is the Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology at the Yale Divinity School and is founder and director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. He was educated in his native Croatia, the United States, and Germany, earning doctoral and postdoctoral degrees with highest honors from the University of Tübingen in Germany. He has written or edited more than 20 books, written over 100 scholarly articles, and his work has been featured in the Washington Post, Christianity Today, Christian Century, Sojourners, and several other outlets, including NPR's Speaking of Faith, now on Being with Krista Tippett, and public television's Religion and Ethics Newsweekly. I will attempt to stop coughing. Today, we will have a conversation with Professor Volf about his most recent book and winner of the Christianity Today Best Book Award, The Cost of Ambition, How Striving to Be Better Than Others Makes Us Worse. His life's work has been committed to addressing the most fundamental questions of our being, and this is one just example. I had the pleasure to teach this fabulous new book in a seminar this fall on justice and the common good, and it generated by far one of our most provocative conversations. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to discuss it with you today, Miroslav. Thank you and welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here with you.
So we usually like to start with a little bit of background. And so you have a lovely setup in the preface of this book where you talk about where your thinking about ambition emerged and how you came to this particular work. So we would love a bit of context as we start this conversation.
Yeah, it's always hard to trace back or the origins of an idea, but certainly in my own family, growing up as a kid, the idea of being superior to someone. There's a kind of ambivalent relationship to that. Obviously, a little bit of pride that somebody is of our own is good. On the other hand, a little bit of that shouldn't be kind of a measure that we should use. And so that kind of ambivalence was part of also my own life. And sometimes I also say, well, I tend to write books sometimes that deal with the problems that I myself am experiencing. And I am a more competitive person that I'd like to admit having written this book. So you can read it in some ways this way. I have given my own vices, I have recognized in the broader culture quite a significant way in which we, maybe it's not too strong to say, betray our own humanity in the ways in which we go about living our lives and how we go about determining what's really significant and important and what counts as success.
So I think it's really interesting that you describe yourself as very competitive. So One of the people I shared the book when it first came out with is my 25-year-old daughter. She works in DC and she's discerning next steps in her life. She works for a large global law firm as an analyst. Um, and she read the book and she came back to me and she said, I think this is a critique of our entire family. We are a family that thrives on competition.
Yeah.
So everything we do, whether it's baking cookies or playing Scrabble or pickleball, is a competition.
Mm.
Um, and I think that one of the really interesting things about the book is the way you disentangle notions of competition from the pursuit of excellence to this notion of superiority in particular, this idea that you are better than. Could you talk a little bit about this relationship? And would
Yeah.
you, yeah, and then would you say that this is, I didn't read it as a critique of competition in general, so maybe you can disentangle those bits.
Yeah, thank you for asking me that question. I spoke in insufficiently nuanced way when I mentioned competition because you're exactly right. I do not think that competition, as such, the phenomenon of competition is problematic. I think competition needs to be redeemed.
Mhm.
Competition needs to be sanctified, to use a more theological and spiritual, a language of spiritual theology, um, because it's possible to compete simply as a kind of friendship exercise in which competing with somebody else stimulates one's own sense of mastery of a particular art. And in fact, I mentioned the two classical forms of competition that one sees in the world of sport, at least in those sports that I know a little bit, and that is if you see a competition between somebody like in soccer between Messi and Ronaldo, it's a
Mhm.
pretty vicious kind of competition. Um, and with no hesitation of putting other person down. But if you look at the competition between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, for those of you who aren't my age but a little bit younger, this is a prior generation of greats in basketball. You see friends competing and almost have a sense that they equally rejoice whether either one of them wins, and they've had and one can have a very good game at it,
Mhm.
and maybe even better game on account of that. So I do think that it's very important to redeem competition, and you're exactly right. What the book is about, and what I find problematic, is striving for superiority. And by this, I mean to be better than somebody else, whoever that somebody else is. And in that way, I distinguish it also from striving for excellence, because for excellence is excellence, or the goal is then defined by something that's independent from the competitive activity itself. Whereas if you strive for superiority, that becomes the fundamental value that may not occlude or other values, but becomes a dominant value. And I would put it this way: the more dominant value it becomes, the more problematic it is.
So when you think about this, right, sort of the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson relationship, um, and that moment, so what would that have been, the 80s? Sort of what has fundamentally changed in your thinking between that version of competition where you were happy for the success of others, right? You aspired to your own excellence, but success of others. Do you see this as a more recent shift or a more long historical pivot?
Think you can give examples even in the world of sports, and in particular in the world of basketball of somebody who was really one of the greatest, which is Jordan. He was highly competitive, invested in superiority, right? To the point that it was uncomfortable for people to witness that. There was something demeaning toward himself that he so insisted on being kind of the greatest. So I think it is a feature of, I would even say it's a feature of human nature. We can talk about how it was built into us and why it is there. But I think it has become increasingly dominant in the cultures of modernity that are largely culturally determined by the way in which we organize basic activities of our lives, which is to say, by our economy. It wasn't, there was always kind of this economic competition in wealth, but even somebody like Adam Smith in Theory of Moral Sentiments, he complains about the idea of striving for superiority as such. He's quite aware that that can be kind of acid for our kind of moral selves. And so that you have those critics early on in 18th century critics, in 19th century you have critics. But what you have less and less in the late 20th, beginning of 21st century, critics of striving for superiority. And I think part of it is that economic rationality has kind of seeped into all the different dimensions of our lives. And I think that we even also pretty much decided that a kind of evolutionary biology holds the key to most of what we as humans are and what we as humans do. I don't want to at all simply dismiss evolutionary biology by no means, but I'm pushing against the idea that that's the definitive of who we are as human beings and that all our moral sentiments can be derived from it. And if you try it, if you do that, then suddenly striving for superiority is just what normal human beings do.
So, in some sense, you've described this book as an intervention, right? And you've also just said that we don't have as many critics of this current way of engaging and being. Um, what is the nature of the intervention? Clearly, you're a critic of it. And what else do you think needs to happen to interrupt this?
Well, it's intervention in a sense that I'm relatively a lone voice, and there are a lot of resonances that the book is receiving, or when I was lecturing about it, people recognize as a problem what I was describing, and maybe even became particularly sensitive to it when it comes to use of social media. And it's seen as a problem, though, even in discussion about use of social media, I don't see on the basis of it a kind of sustained critique of striving for superiority that is exacerbated by social media in many ways. But in some ways, it's a limited intervention that I give. I have a set of interlocutors. One of them is John Milton, the other one is Søren Kierkegaard, and Apostle Paul. Partly because I find them very compelling in their vision of humanity and in critique of striving for superiority, all three of them in many ways. But for instance, what would it mean in various domains of life, whether that's sport or that's economics, whether that's in politics, or even in arts or education? What would it mean to have a friendly competition? how does it look like? How do we foster it? Um, what kinds of motivations can be provided? So none of this has been explored. And what I would hope is that somebody would take the question of friendly competition that is not based on striving for superiority and make it a major research project across domains of our broadly social and individual lives. Then it would, because it is a problematic phenomenon of that scope, rather than being limited to a particular domain. It almost there are no domains of life where you don't sense it. There are some domains where it's more present, some maybe less. But if you start with education, if you go to economy and politics, certainly in sports it is, but even in arts, for instance. Very often, what counts as success in arts is mediated through modes of competition, often then judged in monetary terms. I'd love discussion about all these domains.
So, one of the things I wonder, there's a philosopher at Duke, Wayne Norman, who studies competition, and he looks at particular spaces where competition is built into the activity. So one of them is sports. So, ultimately in a basketball game, there's a winner and a loser. And there are particular rules of how you play the game. He looks at the law. And litigation, it's an adversarial process, but it's structured. Um, do you think that we've lost some of the structures to sort of engage this or to create a normative framework for competition? How would I love the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson example because there are these epic sports rivalries where people do have a genuine sense of appreciation of what the other is able to achieve. Can we imagine structures for this that do something different, that enable the pursuit of excellence without I am better than you, therefore you are less than me, which seems to be the problematic aspect of this.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's what I would like to see explored. And
Uh-huh.
obviously, one would need folks who are experts in various domains. Um, and even you might say, well, I'm in the context of education, but I feel like I'm a participant. I'm not so much a observer from the outside of the educational process from its very beginnings. With 2-year-olds or whatever that is to later on in life. And so I think that would be my goal to somehow think how can we shape whether with rules, and I might be skeptical maybe that rules can be designed simply for it, but what might be the other ways in which one may foster a more friendly, but in sometimes no less intense
Mhm.
engagement, right? And what can we do so that um, the rules that exist would not be flaunted. And
Mhm.
one sees very clearly these days examples of such striving for superiority, irrespective of what's happening or the consequences that
Yeah.
it has in the domain of politics. And rules would be helpful. How does one have also culture that suppose
Yeah.
keeping those rules and holding them to be something that's valuable? Um, a host of
Yeah.
questions that
Yeah.
needed to be explored, and that's why I think it's an intervention. It's by
Mhm.
no means I by no means have a solution to problems that are they're structural.
So, maybe we could talk a little bit if we just take, right, you work at Yale, you work with students. How could we think about a different set of cultural norms in higher education that might foster intense pursuit of excellence, but an adherence to rules, right, without this notion of superiority. I'm
Mhm.
thinking of one of the funniest conversations, well, funny in a sad sort of way, conversation with a group of students about cheating. And the overwhelming response was, I only cheat if I have to. Um, and right, it's sort of the need to be successful
Mhm.
trumps any sense of rules. So I agree, rules are not sufficient. But are we every day doing things in the context of our classrooms, in the context of elite universities, that are essentially replicating this way of being that students see out in the world, whether it's professional sports or politics or the economy, um, this drive to be superior. Can we, in the context of higher education, interrupt that?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. And I should say that one of the experiences that kind of nudged me to write the book was teaching Yale undergrads and seeing how within the context of Yale um, that they're fragile. And if they're unable to perform now at the top of the group of relative comparants, which are now the Yale students, they feel like their self is falling apart, and hence rise in depression maybe can be among students. They aren't they feel able to achieve, but that's because they've come to Yale as achiever. They were on the top of their high schools or close to the top, so that the question begins even before elite universities, and in elite universities is particularly strong. But it's also strong not just on the student end, but on the faculty end
Mhm.
as well. The way in which we are hired, way in which we are promoted, all happens through competitive processes. Um, I don't have sufficient knowledge of the dynamics of educational processes to know what a good effective intervention would look like. I know that I have a hard time as a professor grading students and evaluating, um, and feel often that I should be thinking merit of the argument and forgetting comparative judgments with others. But then, am I cheating other students out of something if I don't pay attention to that because they expect? I have questions. I don't have answers.
That's great. One of the things when I first picked up the book, I was thinking of Michael Sandel's book on meritocracy, which
Mhm.
really has a different argument, but is aligned in certain ways. And he has this quote where he talks about the meritocratic ideal not being a remedy for inequality, but rather a justification of inequality. Um, to what extent do you see this striving for superiority as a rationalization of the way things currently exist and a way to push against more significant social change?
Yeah, no, I think attempts to retrieve meritocracy is really an attempt to put on a little bit surer footing the striving for superiority that's going on. And I find myself that meritocracy, it's a very, I see it as a very blunt instrument in some ways. And so sometimes I give an example. So okay, let's say that being called to be a professor at Yale is some kind of an achievement.
It is.
We can discuss what kind of achievement is.
Yeah.
Let's grant that it is some kind of an achievement. So I'm one of those. And if you ask me what percentage of that achievement can I ascribe to myself so that I can say, well, Miroslav, merit this.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say, but 3%,
Interesting.
five at the most. So much. I mean, I can go down the list of all the people and all the situations and circumstances. Um, some of them very planned, some of them, but not by me. Some of them completely chance situations that have contributed to this. Um, And it seems to me that I can't even then tell which ones, so that I can say, "Oh, this is my contribution."
Mhm.
Even that I'm not quite sure that I could identify. And so it seems to me that meritocracy doesn't help me. It becomes another mode of striving for superiority without even being able to properly ascribe the achievement to the self, and hence I find it very unsatisfactory. Uh, what I partly do in the book is I lean heavily on Apostle Paul,
Mhm.
but in his case, it's very, very clear that it's meritocracy in some
Yeah.
ways. In
Mhm.
this case, moral meritocracy that he was a critic of, and I think rightly so.
That's great. So just as a point of information, that's a question I ask students every year in this Justice and the Common Good class. And over the past 4 years, if I averaged the percent that they thought was entirely of their doing, it's 96%. So it's the inverse of your articulation. And I think this sort of bespeaks the moment that we're in thinking about students. So, right, very little, less than 5%, they ascribe to circumstances, to others, to chance, to anything. They really see themselves as a product of their own effort. And it's very much a manifest destiny logic. Uh,
Yeah, that's very interesting. What makes it what makes them need it so much
yep.
that I mean, I could be completely wrong and they could be right, but that's not likely.
Not likely.
Not likely. Not likely in those numbers.
No. And I think I think your question is really apt because I think there is something in that they need to believe that it's within their control
Yeah,
and that they can navigate that and that their success is of their own. I just think it's interesting the way you framed it in contrast to the modal student in this particular class, who is part of a selective group selected because of their commitments to the common good, which I think makes it even more extreme than in
that's
their
interesting.
thinking.
Yeah.
But super, super interesting. Um, one of
But it
the,
seems to me,
oh no,
excuse.
go on, go on.
I was just going to say that I think isn't it in Sandel's book that he quotes former President Obama, who, as many others, but he also used sports
Yep.
as what really meritocracy should look like and what our aspirations should be. And that abstracts from any contribution or how that particular person has come to perform in the way in which they perform, and simply looks at the performance
Yeah,
rather than at a much broader picture, which I think one ought to
yeah, the
look.
one.
And
Yeah.
that's understandably maybe, but that's a common picture of contemporary society in America. It's less so in Europe, but certainly
Mhm.
so in United States.
So, one of the pieces that I read recently that I absolutely loved, it was an interview with you and Christopher Winmer, right? And talking about friendship.
Mm.
And I'm wondering if you could imagine friendship and sort of an attention to friendships as these spaces of mutual pursuit of excellence could be a way to interrupt this notion of superiority, and that um, part of our challenge may be the absence of robust friendships of that
Mm.
nature
Mm.
anymore.
Yeah,
And
that,
maybe we
that's
could
a
talk.
that's a very good example. And Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, they're
Mhm.
friends. Um, and I think it can interrupt. And if the friendship is deep, you can rejoice over successes of another person, even when your own successes pale in comparison. So Chris and I have a book of correspondence between poet and theologians. It's called Glimmerings. And it takes a certain kind of humility, and I won't. Maybe I'm boasting now in my humility, but friendship comes. It's a result of friendship to let yourself, as a mere theologian for whom English is a second language, to have correspondence with one of the really top best stylists in English language that we have today. His prose is absolutely spectacular. He's a poet, of course, but
Yeah.
his prose is absolutely spectacular. But I have to say, I rejoice for the Christus. Any gem that is there in correspondence with me is a great gem that has occurred. If I think, oh, I'm now in shadow because of that, I'm going to rejoice with him. And Augustine has this beautiful line where disagreement with friend is like disagreeing with oneself,
Yeah.
without rancor, without envy. And that's really a beautiful thing when one can be in that kind of a situation. And it doesn't diminish the kind of sense of wanting, driving for excellence. Uh, but it's just generous and wants to be truthful about others and rejoice in the truth of who the other person is. That would be my aspiration, my goal.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought. Can we talk a little bit about the theses that you have in your conclusion?
Mm.
So you do this like fabulous thing that I almost wish every book would do, where you summarize the core theses that you've presented across the book. And there are 24 of them. And I would love to address the ones that are more aspirational and forward-looking. You have this section, it's theses 20 through 24, beyond superiority and inferiority. And I think these are just a beautiful aspirational way for us all to be thinking. And the first one is you state to avoid dying, to live in true freedom with joy. We must give up striving for superiority. Um, can you talk a little bit about what it is you're trying to implicate here? I love the notion of freedom, the notion of joy. Um, how is it that this is going to liberate us in a particular way?
Behind it is a story that I use in the book, and the story comes from Kierkegaard, who is one of my interlocutors, and that's the story of this little lily, and it comes from Kierkegaard's commenting about Jesus teaching about worry. And Jesus points then to the lilies that they don't worry, and yet they are dressed, clad more beautifully than Solomon was in all his royal glory. Um, and he tells a story of this one lily, Kierkegaard does, who had a friend, a bird, and that picks up because Jesus mentions birds also in the same passage. Then bird would always come and then tell the little lily what the bird has seen flying. And every time the bird would come, the lily would feel a little bit diminished herself because partly she couldn't fly, and partly the bird was telling her about those wonderful other lilies that had been seen. And then finally, after a while, since they were such good friends, they decided that the bird would peck around the little lily's roots, take her with some soil to the place where those splendid lilies were growing. And that's what happened. And in the process, as one can imagine, little Lily has died. She died in comparison, as she was comparing herself with others and wanting to be compared with them. And so there's a kind of an injury that happens to us in comparison, where we stack, and we don't stack as well as we hoped that we would, and we shrivel. We cannot be ourselves in joy and celebrate that good which is there. And so, to me, that's one of the key elements. How can I cannot be free if I am always oppressed by wanting to be somebody who I'm proving not able to be, because I'm trying to compete with somebody who, for whatever reason, has become my comparable. And of course, if I can be free, I can be also rejoicing. I can't rejoice over their successes and beauty. I can rejoice over my what I can do, the good that I experience, and I'm actually hindering myself. And the point is that if I were to win that contest and have a moment of freedom, exuberance, and joy, there would come a moment not too longer later where I would compare myself with somebody else, and or somebody else would come from behind my back and overtake me, and the process would start afresh. And there's a constant oscillation between elation, brief moments of elation for one's successes, and then the long road of living with one's own failures in some ways, and failures when one isn't a failure, when one is such a wonderful, marvelous human being, and failure is completely off the social comparison making.
That's great. That's just beautiful. Um, there's a next one on 21 where, and this is, I think, you reference Paul here, which I think is important. You talk about the standing of any person in community is exactly equal to the standing of any other. And I I think when we imagine shared flourishing, when we imagine the common good, this is just so essential. Can you flesh this out a little bit more for us and why this is important to your argument?
Yeah. Well, it seems that as soon as you assess value through standings, you're getting into superiority. Because standings are relative socially to the place where you are, and therefore nothing is given as a kind of objective. Everything is constantly subjective, and especially if we live in highly dynamic societies, as we do. Uh, the competitions is going to become very very fierce, and and one wouldn't be able to enjoy uh, a true community. The other one is always um, I look down, or I look up with envy. I look down with certain kind of sense of maybe not despising them, but elevating myself over them. And relationships, social relationships, are all fraught by these comparative advantages and disadvantages. And it would seem to me that in order to have a community, a healthy community, one would have to um, give up on that, transcend that, and find joy in oneself and in the other person.
Wonderful. I want to turn now to one of the questions. Um, this is from Howard Gardner, who states there's a big difference between striving for excellence on the one hand and gloating about one's achievements on the other. Talking about modeling this distinction is one tack. Are there others, and are there cultures or subcultures that highlight this distinction?
That is really great. Yeah, that just tells you my also limitations. You might think that there are we know small subcultures that do that. I think in some ways, friendships we talked about,
Yep.
it is a kind of a little subculture, and it may be broader than just two friends. It may be a group of friends, and you can imagine how that would be the mode in which they exist. We know that in some families as well, this is modeled, whereas other families work a little bit differently. So. Uh, I would love to see, say, cultural anthropological studies that kind of dig out the kind of how societies or cultures of this sort, or even subcultures of this sort, how do they how do they adjust themselves to living in a modern world? What happens? What are the dynamics, and what keeps that from exploding? Because the pressures are immense. How to negotiate that? So yes, I would say we can make an argument, but ideal case scenario would be to have communities to which we can point. Look at that.
Yeah.
This is how it looks like. It's possible. A different world is possible. They live it, right?
Yeah. I think it's also both with the kind of increasing alienation, the decline of community, decline of friendships is what is perhaps enabling this to really take
Yes.
over in these huge ways. So, great question. Next one is from a big Boston sports fan. I can't help but comment about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. In my opinion, what made Larry Bird so great is that he made the whole team better. It wasn't just about himself. For most other basketball players and athletes in general, that's not the case. Can you comment on how collaboration plays a role in one's own ambition, how this factors in or doesn't? So this seems hugely important as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful comment. And so whatever happened between him and Magic Johnson, this was a feature character trait of Larry Bird more generally. It looks like he was oriented to his entire team, and it's really fantastic to have somebody of this sort. Um, and one might ask, well, be nice to have exemplars like him, for instance, very prominent. What does it take to sustain this? What does it take? What kind of sensibilities one has to have in order to make this to be the pattern of one's own life? Um, and it's a beautiful example.
Great. Next question. What would a humble institution look like in practice? That's a tough one.
Mm, mm. It is a tough one. Um, That's a very, very good question. So what's a humble team, right?
Yeah.
We talked about in some
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah.
And if if the behavior of Larry Bird is contagious, and it might have well been. I'm not enough knowledgeable enough about history of Celtics. If it was contagious, it was a collaborative team. I must say that somehow, and I'm not sure exactly what the reason why, and the first time it occurred to me now as we are talking, I run a small organization, which I think is like that in some ways. I feel that I'm surrounded by very humble people.
Mhm.
And it's beautiful to see how we all kind of want other persons to succeed in the team, and it's a very pleasant thing to experience and pleasant environment to work in.
Do you think
And
you there?
it takes I think it takes people with receptivity to that, so that they kind of mirror back to others who attempt that, and so collaborative effort is to create an environment, cultural environment of this sort.
Do you think you do particular things to foster that environment in that organization you lead? And do you think you select to invite in particular kinds of people who are more receptive to that? Or do you think this was lucky?
I don't know. I'm not a very good leader. So that's pretty clear. I think it's partly lucky, partly I've ended up collaborating with people.
Mhm.
One person who is part of it is has been my doctoral student for quite some time. Just a splendid human being. So and so are others, and I'm just look at them and I rejoice how wonderful they are.
That's that's wonderful to hear. Um, Next question. Aren't there institutional incentives to strive for superiority at elite research universities like Yale and maybe Notre Dame? Can resistance to ambition become more than a personal practice, but taken to an institutional level? And if so, how?
Yeah. Again, I am beyond my pay grade. Is the question, because it certainly is all the way from how one gets to be a member of the faculty, how promotion works, and often how life is even after promotion. I've heard some of my colleagues say that their best work was done after they've received tenure, when they were not in the kind of competitive environment. Then suddenly they could be truly themselves, rather than aligning themselves with certain kinds of expectations that would result in assessment of a certain sort. And that is very interesting, right? And I think universities and faculties would do well to reflect on this. I'm not sure exactly what that would be. I'm just right now sitting on a promotions committee. We have letters of comparisons and all that kind of thing. And I think, what am I doing? But if they will ask me, well, how do we do how do we do it otherwise? If a provost were come to me for advice, I would say, I'm not sure.
That's good. The specific goal of competition might influence the degree to which superiority is motivation. If we reframe the goal of competition, e.g., from amassing individual wealth to improve societal well-being, might that help us pursue excellence rather than superiority? So is it really about our goals and the
Yeah.
individuation of those goals that's the problem here?
Yeah, I mean, certainly would help if we didn't think of achievement primarily, as we in the cultural moment are prone to, I think, in terms of achievement. And achievement is then tied to this non-value called success. And if we can have a common goals that are substantive, the easier it would be not to organize our lives around competition, but rather about contributions that people make toward that goal. But even in that, right? If you agree on the goal and then but you assess how one makes what contribution one makes toward it, and it can turn into a competitive um, endeavor. So
Yeah,
some kind of it would seem to me that some kind of spirituality would have to undergird whatever is done. But with this, I'm not saying that therefore we don't need also kind of systemic structural changes. We do. I just don't know much about how to do it in various domains.
I'm wondering if that when you talk about spirituality, this seems critically important because at base it's about what it means to live a good life and
Mm.
what it means to be a good person in that life. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that dimension of your argument. Um, this next question is about the zero-sum nature of social media. Thinking about the ways in which young people build a sense of worth in digital silos and how these platforms reinforce superiority as a motivation and really as a means to an end or the end unto itself. How are you thinking about the interplay of technologies with an intervention or with this process of competition? So technology and your argument.
Well, in some ways, technology has been designed to exacerbate our propensity to strive for superiority. Um, the likes or whatever equivalent is. I have been on social media, I must admit, for quite some time. TikTok is completely, I've never, I had maybe one experience with it. I used to be on Twitter and on Facebook, and probably the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've completely stayed away. Um, but it kind of thrives in these quantitative measures of one's popularity and therefore of one's success, and it makes one obsessed with this. First thing one does, well, how many likes do I have? And because that somehow measures my importance. So yes, I agree with that, and we should resist, especially exposure. Of fairly vulnerable people in early teens to these kind of comparisons, um, and therefore to these kinds of technologies. And I think we should regulate these technologies as we regulate um, substances and how they're used and abused.
Great. What role does power play in your vision of striving for excellence rather than superiority? Particularly thinking here about a person's desire for control or power, especially when they feel powerless. Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes it's I'm aware of a sense in which um, my talk about striving for superiority and my problematizing it can be perceived, and I've encountered that as well. Oh, there's the white male from elite university. After he has achieved whatever we generally want people to achieve, now he comes up and talks to us who are haven't the position that he has about not striving for superiority. That there may be a sense that there's kind of hypocrisy in which I'm involved. Here, maybe even nefariously making sure that my domain is kept safe from incursions from below. Um, my sense, though, and I maybe there's some subconscious motivations of this sort, but my sense is when I observe the situation, is that people who suffer most are actually the people who are closer to what we normally considered as a kind of bottom. It's
Mhm.
very hard to move oneself up in striving for superiority, and the competition is equally fierce, and resources are relatively meager often. And so it seems to me that this is a good news from where I sit. I'd be happy to be corrected. From where I sit, this is a alternative to striving for superiority is good news for those on the top, as it is good news from those closer to the what we call bottom. But I want to call into question these categories as I've just sketched
Yep,
them
yep,
right
yep.
now, and want to make sure that it isn't that affirmation of sheer humanity of every individual is clearly comes to fore in what I'm after, because that's really at the bottom of my own interest in this book and in this project.
Wonderful. As we wrap up, I want to ask sort of two hopefully quick questions. One, what is it you're working on now? And if you were to recommend something you're reading, what would it be?
Oh, that's really okay. So what am I? So right now, I have delivered lectures in Aberdeen, and I'm on Amor Mundi, on love for the world. And right now, I'm teaching, so I'm not working on much in terms of writing. But come summer, I hope that I'll be revising this book, and it really matters to me for us to find ways in which to love the broken world, not its brokenness, but the world in its broken state. And I think the Christian faith has a great deal of resources to open this possibility up for us, and we really desperately need it.
Wonderful. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for this lovely conversation. It's been a delight to spend this hour with you. So I
Thank
appreciate it.
you. The pleasure is mutual. Thank you so much for making this conversation possible.
And I invite everybody to join us on February 23rd with Michael Norton from the Harvard Business School, who'll be talking about habits, ritual, and well-being. Thank you so much.